It's settled then. Mark gets the mountain cabin. It's only fair, considering he's the one who never wanted to put in the work at the firm. My brother Julian didn't even look at me as he slid the deed across the table. My sister Elena just smirked, swirling her wine. "The cabin is a shack, Leo," she added, her voice dripping with fake pity. "But Julian takes the penthouse and I take the estate. It's about lifestyle alignment. You always were better suited for the dirt." I looked at the deed. The black wood cabin, a place with no power, no water, and no hope. "I'll take it," I said. Julian laughed. "Good, you're officially off the family payroll. Enjoy the fresh air, little brother." "Hi, my name is Leo Thorne. In my family, I was always the disappointment. My brother Julian was the shark of the boardroom, and my sister Elena was the socialite who married into old money. I, on the other hand, spent my 20s with dirt under my fingernails and a backpack full of rocks. They told everyone I was a starving artist or a delusional wanderer. What they never cared to understand was that my wandering was actually a decade of high-level geological engineering. I didn't just look at mountains, I read them like a map. For years, my father and I shared a bond they couldn't understand. He knew Julian and Elena were vultures who would pick the estate clean before his body was even cold. A few months before he passed, he handed me a dusty, leather-bound ledger. He didn't say much, just, "Leo, the Blackwood land has a secret. The ancestors called it the Vein of Tears. Keep it, no matter how much they laugh at you." After the funeral, while Julian was busy selling off Dad's watch collection, I spent my last savings on a high-resolution satellite spectrography scan of that specific mountain. When the data came back, my heart nearly stopped. The shack sat directly on the intersection of two major tectonic plates, pushing up a high-concentration gold vein that hadn't been touched in a million years. It wasn't just a cabin, it was the X on a multi-million-dollar treasure map. I arrived at the cabin in the dead of winter. It was worse than I remembered. The porch was rotting, the roof was a sieve, and the nearest neighbor was a 5-mile hike away. But I didn't care about the architecture. I spent my first week taking soil samples in the freezing rain, confirming what the satellites saw. The concentration was staggering, nearly 40 grams of gold per ton of earth. On the 10th day, a black SUV struggled up the muddy path. Out stepped Silas Vane. Silas was Julian's fixer, the man who handled the dirty legal work for the Thorne group. He looked ridiculous in his polished Italian shoes stepping over puddles of slush. "Leo," he started, shivering, "Julian is concerned. He thinks he was too harsh at the meeting. He wants to make it right. He's authorized me to offer you $80,000 for this property. It's way above market value, but he wants you to have a fresh start in the city." I leaned against the rotting railing, sipping coffee from a tin cup. I knew how Silas worked. If he was here, Julian had found Dad's ledger and realized something was missing. 80,000? I smiled. Last week it was a worthless shack. Why the sudden change of heart, Silas? Did Julian realize he forgot his golf clubs in the attic? Silas's eyes darted toward my rock samples on the porch. "It's a generous offer, Leo. Take the money and run. This land is nothing but trouble. Tell Julian I like the trouble. And tell him if he wants my land, he'll have to do a lot better than $80,000. Julian didn't wait long. A week later, a local sheriff served me with a cease and desist and an intent to seize. Julian had pulled every political string in the capital. He had the land rezoned as a critical protected watershed. This meant that, under state law, I couldn't even dig a hole for a mailbox without a federal permit. It was a death sentence for any mining plans. He planned to force me into a forced sale to the state, which would then outsource the land management to a private firm, owned by Julian. It was a perfect legal heist. Or so he thought. I spent the next 3 days in the basement of the county archives, buried in documents from the late 1800s. I wasn't looking for environmental laws. I was looking for the Blackwood Mineral Sovereign Grant. In 1912, our great-grandfather had helped fund the original state railroad. In exchange, the governor had signed a sovereign grant that gave our family absolute and eternal mineral supremacy over that mountain. This type of grant is a relic of the old world, and it has one specific rule. It cannot be superseded by modern zoning or environmental laws unless the owner voluntarily waives it. Julian, in his rush to give me the worthless land, had signed a deed that transferred the sovereign grant in its entirety to me. He thought he was giving me a liability. He was actually giving me a kingdom that was legally immune to his political games. I didn't go to court. Instead, I went to the one office Julian feared most, Miller Geotech. Elias Miller was a man who had been at war with my brother for a decade. I walked into his office with a vial of soil and the 1912 grant. "Elias," I said, "my brother thinks he's trapped me in a watershed zone. He's trying to seize this land by Friday. I need a drilling rig, a legal team, and a security detail on that mountain by tomorrow morning. I'll give you 20% of the extraction rights and the chance to watch Julian Thorne's empire crumble in real time." Miller looked at the spectrography data, then at the sovereign grant. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. "Leo," he said, "I've been waiting 10 years to find a weapon big enough to sink your brother. I'll have the trucks there by dawn." The next morning, the quiet valley was filled with the roar of industrial diesel engines. We weren't just digging, we were making a statement. We hit the first pocket of quartz at 20 feet. It was thick with yellow veins. It wasn't just gold, it was a bonanza. Tuesday afternoon, Julian and Elena were hosting a victory gala at the Thorne building. They were celebrating the successful acquisition of the watershed land. They had already pre-sold the development rights to a group of international investors. The doors to the ballroom swung open. I walked in, flanked by two of Miller Geotech's top attorneys. I was still wearing my work boots, caked in the very dirt Julian had mocked. "Leo, what is this?" Julian laughed, though his voice had a nervous edge. "Security, I've told you before, my brother is a trespasser. He has no standing here." "Actually, Julian," I said, my voice echoing through the silent room, "I'm here as a neighbor, a very wealthy neighbor." I pulled a core sample from my pocket, a 6-inch cylinder of rock that was more gold than stone, and rolled it down the long mahogany table. It smashed into Julian's crystal glass, sending shards of expensive champagne flying. "The Blackwood Mineral Sovereign Grant," I continued, as my lawyer handed him the archives documents. "It turns out that zoning laws don't apply to sovereign mineral holders. You tried to seize an active mine using fraudulent environmental claims. That's not just a mistake, Julian. That's felony racketeering." Elena's face turned a sickly shade of gray. The investors they had invited began to whisper, then stand up. They realized they had been sold a property that was legally untouchable. The fallout was total. Julian's firm was hit with a barrage of lawsuits from the investors he had misled. The critical watershed label was investigated and found to be a product of bribery, leading to several of Julian's political friends being indicted. Elena tried to call me a dozen times, crying about family values and sharing the burden. I never answered. Julian lost the penthouse. Elena lost the estate. I, however, didn't move into a mansion. I stayed at the cabin. I used the first million to build a sustainable, high-tech fortress on that mountain. They thought they were giving me a cold, lonely grave in the woods. They thought they were the masters of the world because they sat in glass towers. But they forgot that everything they built, the steel, the glass, the wealth, it all comes from the earth. My name is Leo Thorne. I was always the one who knew the value of the dirt, and now I'm the only one left standing on it.